Hello and welcome back to Legacy Larder. I'm Andy and today we are going to make something pretty cool. Got this little cookbook, Pet Dinners for Fall. There used to be a pet condensed milk company. It was actually the first company to be able to seal milk for troops back in World War I. Anyway, they used to send out these little cookbooks, and this one's from 1933. I got it from my mother. And we're going to try a recipe out of there. We're going to make apple strudel. And this is going to be pretty fun. So I'm going to give you a closer look at this before we get started. And we'll get into it. But a couple of things that I learned about this pet company. So in World War I, the troops used to call their cans of milk, their milk from the tin cow. John Meyerberg, a Swiss immigrant, is the one who patented the process and started the Helvetica Milk Condensing Company in 1885 with a couple other local merchants. And in 1962, they actually had a factory in New Glarus, Wisconsin. In 1962, that closed. The first patents for this process were granted back in 1884 to John Meyerberg. And their height was in 1950, I believe, and then through years of mergers, acquisitions, and other, they've kind of faded into obscurity. I think that they might still be made in the Southeast. You might be able to still find the brand in the Southeast United States, but it's not as wide as it was before. So kind of a cool little history lesson. Let me give you a closer peek at this, and let's get making some apple strudel. How cool is this? Look at that, Pet Dinners. When I first saw these, I thought, pet milk? Wait a minute. What if I don't want to milk my pet? You can see, if the focus goes, 1933, Pet Milk Company. And these little guys, I've got a few of them. They have all sorts of really cool looking recipes, but every one of them pushes that delicious, nutritious pet milk for a well-balanced meal. We should all be drinking our Ovaltine. We should also be using double-rich pet milk because we need that milk every day, adults and children. All right, cool little booklet. Let's get started on that recipe. So let's start off with our flour. We've got 2 cups of bread flour, and I'll dump that into the 2 cups of flour. Now the directions say to sift the flour, but this is, remember, from 1933, so there were more weevils around in 1933 probably than there are today, so I feel confident that there are no bugs in this flour, or at least none that I can see or care about. And if I can't see them, I don't care about them. So we're gonna risk it and go non-sifter. All right, so into the flour we want to put in a half teaspoon of baking powder and a half teaspoon of salt. So I've got those right here. Half teaspoon of baking powder, half teaspoon of salt. I tend to use the coarse salt for pretty much everything. That's just how I like to do it. I don't want to have 14 different kinds of salt sitting around the house. Okay, so this, the directions again said to re-sift, but we're just gonna give it a little bit of a toss together here. And we'll set this to the side and get working on our wet ingredients. Okay, so wet ingredients. First, let's start off with that egg. Go. 1 beaten egg. All right. 1 beaten egg. And we have a 1/4 cup of melted shortening. Again, I'm using vegetable shortening. If I try to follow the recipes as closely as I can, so if there's ever a call for actual lard, I'll probably use actual lard, that sort of thing. Then we want to add in a tablespoon of lemon juice and 1/2 cup of pet milk. So, 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. So here's our 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, and then here's our 1/2 cup of pet milk. So, there we go. Now let's mix these all together. And we will add this over to our dry ingredients. I'm not sure why we bothered to melt that shortening, because as soon as it hit the cold egg and other ingredients, it stiffened back up pretty good. Okay, so let's move this here. Add our wet into our dry. And get this mixed up. Now what we're looking for is a dough. Probably using the wrong tool again. I make a habit of that. Let me clean this off a bit. Cover your ears. Okay, let's do this with the tools more natural to us. Apple Strudel I've never made before, though. This is going to be a new experience. This is another recipe. I've never tried this, but being that it came in a mass-marketed little cookbook, I'm pretty interested in how this is going to turn out. If there was a public outcry from terrible recipes being passed around in propaganda, this was back in just the early days of propaganda, so things were a little bit more in your face. After Edward Bernays gave everybody that, what was he, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, gave everybody the clue book or the answer manual on how to brainwash everyone. So I'm going to turn this out and knead it on the counter, because I think that'll be easier. So I've got a little bit of flour here. I'm just going to put out, and I'll get this, try to get it all together so I don't lose any of this potentially delicious apple strudel dough. It's a very stiff dough, very dry. Holy, very dry. I guess back in 1933, you really had to work for your strudel. I'm going to call that pretty well kneaded enough. A note on flour, bread flour versus regular old flour. Bread flour has 1 gram more protein than regular all-purpose flour. So I think it's 3 grams in all-purpose flour and 4 grams in bread flour. All right, we're going to get this rolled out without things. And then once it is rolled out nice and thin, well, I think this is going to be 2 pieces. Let's make this into 2 pieces. Looks pretty close. And each of these is going to be its own little log that we will dress up with some apples and other things. So far, this is a rough one. Sheesh. This does not look light or delicate at all. This is just a big old clunky, hard slab of dough. This looks terrible. Yeah, it's cheating. I don't care. It's hard. One. All right, I'm going to try to move this off to the side so I can do the other. I'm going to restart this as a ball, I think. Maybe things will go a little better. Oh, did every housewife in America have shoulders like Lou Ferrigno from making stuff like this? And they all smoked too. They had terrible diets. not healthy people. Oh, I'm waning. This dough is like the consistency of a really, really heavy pie crust. It's really, really dense. Holy cats. I think we're gonna probably call this good enough. The recipe says it should be rolled out very thin. I think that's pretty thin, so we'll call that good. I'm also gonna move this one off to the side so we can work on filling. We are going to be using today Fiji apples, not for any particular reason, just because they were the first ones I saw and they looked tasty. So this is what we're going to do. And we need a total of 5 cups of chopped apples. So this is probably more than 5 cups worth, so we'll just cut until we get to the 5 cup mark and save the rest for some other treat. Okay. Apple cutting wisdom, I don't know, maybe there's good ways. I tend to go a little bit on the lazy / easy way with these. There, done, easy peasy. I'm gonna go 1/4-inch squares with these, I think, because they have to be small enough to be able to roll up into this dough, and not so big that they're gonna tear through the dough. But not too small where we're just rubbing applesauce on some dough. So I'm gonna go with about 1/4-inch squares. I don't know if it's still the case, but for a while there was a lot of emphasis on the right way to cut things, like apples, onions, pretty much anything that needed to be cut. And then it seemed like there was almost like public shaming if somebody cut their thing, whatever, the wrong way, according to some internet hero. My vote on all that is, if you're cooking, then cook. If however you want to make it smaller, you need small pieces. It doesn't really matter how you do it. They just have to be smaller pieces. So if you like to take your time and do it your own way, take your time, do it your own way. And anybody who comes over with an opinion on how you should cut up that onion, smile at them politely, hand them the knife and the onion, and invite them to go to work. Hopefully you have like 50 or 60 onions that have to be cut up so they can relish in knowing how to do something differently than you know how to do it. And you can relish in the tears of your enemies as they're cutting up those onions. All right, 1 cup. 2 cups. 3 cups. 4 cups. 5 cups. Now, I'm going to roll out these guys one at a time and stretch back out what we had done before very carefully. They're delicate pie crusts. So they're going to be bread, so I shouldn't be, throwing static at whatever this is going to turn out to be. And so we've got 2. I'm going to see if I can fit both into the frame here. I can just move this guy over a little bit. Like so. And I get the other one laid out beside. So we have Quite a difference here in what I thought was halfway, but we're going to roll with it. Okay, so one of the first things we have to do here is cinnamon and sugar these. So I've got it's a teaspoon of cinnamon and a half cup of sugar. So I'm going to mix these together. And this gets split 50-50, one per half of the dough. So I'm going to see if I can make this happen in a 50-50 sort of way. Oh, when that cinnamon hits the air, oh my goodness. It's so good. So we've got a whole bunch of cinnamon sugar on here. Now we're going to take our 5 cups of apples that we just diced up and get those spread out on here. So this is not going to take 5 cups of apples. I can see that right now because that was just 1 cup. I don't know how thin these folks rolled this back in the 1930s. Apparently, they were willing to put in a lot more work than I was, because rolling this stuff out wasn't any fun at all. It's a very, very stiff dough. So, okay, look at that, folks. 3 cups of apple, not 5 after all. Okay, now we're gonna dot that with little bits of butter. I've got 2 tablespoons of butter that are cut up into little cubes here, so I can put butter on each of these, about half and half again, and this butter will melt and into the cinnamon sugar, make a bit of a caramel, so that's going to be tasty. The next ingredient is chopped nuts. I've got some chopped pecans here. The recipe calls for a half cup of those, so I'm going to sprinkle half cup. It just asks for chopped nuts, not specifically pecans, but I saw pecans and I bought pecans, so whoever eats this gets pecans. If they complain, no, I'm not going to make another one. There is one ingredient that I'm not adding here that is in the recipe, so I apologize for that, and that's raisins. The reason I'm not adding that is because I want people to eat this. Now we're going to roll this up and put it onto a buttered pan and bake it in the oven. So let me get this rolled up if I can. I'm starting to think that probably nobody actually made these before, because this is not the smoothest execution of a recipe. We've got 2 logs of apples and stuff. Junk is falling out of both sides, so that's not exactly going to plan. I'm gonna pause right there and grab a pan and butter it so we can get these chopped into 2-inch slices and into the oven. Here I have just a large flat pan cookie sheet. Recipe says that it should be greased, so I'm using a pat of butter, and I'm going to grease this up with the butter. I try not to use spray oils for this sort of thing, because they're kind of watery, it seems like, and don't work as well for me as butter has, so I tend to stick with butter. I figure that's what people were probably using anyway before all the sprays came into fashion. Okay, so I've got our buttered pan and we've got our logs. Our next step is to cut these in 2-inch slices and get them onto this pan without dumping all the stuff out of them. So this should be interesting. I don't know. Doesn't that look beautiful, folks? Let's try another one. It's about 2 inches. This isn't going well. All right, change of plan. I don't think this actually went through a test kitchen, and I'd like to see what it actually tastes like when it's cooked and not just be a pile of goo. So I'm just going to try to get the logs in their entirety onto the pan, and they should cook about the same. And that way we can see, I can slice them afterward. Because slicing them right now is just dumping everything out of them. So, and that's no good. So let's try to get these gently onto the pan. Oh, it's too bad all this stuff is falling out. Yeah. All right. So here are our two wimpy looking piles of apple strudel. Let's bake it and see what the finished product looks like. Maybe I should be able to still slice this afterward when everything is cooked. And hopefully once the apples are soft and everything's got a little bit more resiliency, I'll be able to come out with something more like that, but that looks good. So let's give this a bake. Okay, let's check these things out. We just finished the recommended 25 minutes at 400 degrees. And this is what we got. I gotta say, just on first glance here, it doesn't look like the most appetizing thing I've ever seen in my life. Let's see if we can cut it up into the 2-inch slices as recommended. Nope. Maybe. Pretty stiff. So this turned out to be like a very dry pie crust on the outside, which I kind of expected. And I'm wondering, the inside, where it's rolled up, isn't exactly cooked. So it smells great. It smells just phenomenal. It just may not be edible, that's all. Let's see here. Maybe I can hack off a few more of these guys and stand it up again back in the oven, and maybe get a little bit more bake time with these smaller pieces. It smells like apple cider. The cinnamon and apple coming together. It just smells like a big old hot pan of apple cider. The Pet Condensed Milk Company. Embarrassing chefs in America since 1894. All right, let's cook this a little bit longer and see if we can stiffen up some of these these little internal bits that are still, well, basically raw. So let's try that out. I think we'll go another, like 5 minutes, and then we'll check again. It is now 5 minutes later. Let's see what we've got. It looks like it's a bit better. These are looking flaky and edible in the middle. that is done. Done pie crust, which is good. A little bit soft, but it's with all the apple in there, that's sort of to be expected too. But I can see it flaking a bit, so that tells me it's basically done. Yeah. So I think that's about the best that we can do. I don't know, gang. This isn't one that I would be popping out for a party, that's for sure. These didn't turn out nearly as well as I'd hoped. So let's close all this up, get a final reading on everything, and I'll give you the recipe. Maybe one of you wants to give this a shot and see if you can doctor it into something that's more useful, more palatable, a little bit easier to look at and serve and eat and stuff. So we ended up with not the best looking dessert that I've ever seen. It's technically apple strudel. There's a bread component, there's apples, there's nuts and a caramelization, sort of. But this one, I followed the recipe. It's not a good one. I wouldn't make this one again. I think that these little pulp recipe books probably were chugged out like so many other publications back in that time in an effort to use any means necessary to drive people to buy more of that product by scare tactics a lot of times, trying to get people to think that they're not going to live as long, be as healthy, be as fit if they don't drink a crazy amount of milk every single day. Now we know a little bit more in some places, and maybe not as much in others, but at this recipe at least, I don't think it's a keeper. I will try. I've got, like I said before, I've got a few of these little pet books, and I've got quite a few cans of condensed milk. So we're going to try some more of those later on, but this apple strudel recipe, I wouldn't do it again. Thank you very much for joining me through this another culinary adventure, a little bit of recipe archaeology. This was out of a 1933 Recipes for Fall pet condensed milk cookbook, and it was fun trying out. I had high hopes until we got to the point of the dough, and then everything kind of fell apart, literally and figuratively. So next time we'll be trying out something different, but for this one, you can't win them all. Thanks very much for joining me. I'm Andy. This is Legacy Larder. Be good to each other, and I hope to see you again soon.